Welcome back to I'm Glad You're Here. Today's episode is with Rachel Smith, a licensed marriage and family therapist based in Florida, who has also gone through extensive training to be a sex therapist as well. This episode will not only cover what that entails, but will also empower conversations between partners and couples, an understanding of defining your own sexuality, your own rhythm, your own flow, the importance and significance that has on yourself, and other beautiful tidbits of wisdom that Rachel had to offer. I'm so excited for you to give this a listen, and let's get on to it. Hi, Rachel, and welcome to I'm Glad You're Here. I'm so honored to have this conversation with you today. How are you doing?
Oh, I am so glad to be here. It's like anytime anyone asks me to have a conversation about sex, I'm here for it because we don't have enough of those conversations. So it is my honor and pleasure. So thank you so much.
Yay, absolutely. I bet. And for me, it's kind of morning time, like, ooh, I get to talk about sex at 9 a.m. today. Okay, here we go. Starting strong.
Yeah, yeah. And this is my nooner, you know?
Amazing. Yep. Just, it's your all day though. Amazing. So
Yeah.
my intention is really to have this conversation to educate,
hmm
empower,
hmm
and just inform people about the conversations we can have around sex, the kind of feelings we can create with sex, and
hmm
really just debunk, demystify, and get in
hmm
there.
hmm Absolutely, absolutely. And because there's so many misconceptions, right? And especially in modern day that we have so much access to information, but then how do we know which information is correct information or what's just, somebody offering their perspective or their experience versus what's actually rooted in science and research, and
Yeah.
that's really the base and the foundation of my work. So much of my work actually is providing psychosexual education, right?
Amazing.
Because that's just non-existent in our society, at least.
Yeah, and I want to point out because we haven't even introduced you, and I know you have a license in marriage and family therapy. I'm
Mhm.
pursuing my MFT right now. I'm taking a course on human sexuality, but I have to say it is so broad.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
no depth,
right.
and it
Mhm.
requires a lot of additional research. It
Yes.
requires a therapist to be curious and
hmm
open.
hmm
So I want to ask you first how you added that sex therapy credential to your resume and how you got into this work.
Yeah. Through my undergraduate experience, I volunteered at a clinic for sexually abused children. And that's when I first started kind of opening my eyes to this realm of, okay, these conversations are really important and the prevalence of sexual trauma. And I mean, right now, the numbers, it's 1 in 3 women and about 1 in 6 men. Right.
Wow.
And so recognizing the prevalence of it, but then again, nobody's really talking about it and the stigma and shame that's around it. But then seeing how these lives were completely transformed by giving them an opportunity to rewrite their story is
Wow.
something that I really wanted to be a part of, right? And
Yeah.
so after undergrad, I always knew I wanted to work with couples. I don't know, it seems with a degree in psychology, I'm like, oh, this is just fascinating. And yeah, yeah. And, relationship dynamics are just so fascinating to me, And so when I went to receive my master's in marriage and family therapy, I also started my practicum at an LGBTQ plus organization. And that was just such an incredible experience. And also in my undergrad, I was a part of the Psychological Society. And so once a month, they would have a different specialist come in and talk to us about, their work. And we had a sex therapist come in. And one thing that he said that just stuck with me, he said, with my work, I'm never bored. And he gave
Ooh.
some examples of, some of his cases. And I was like, you know what? I tend to get bored really easily. And so it was just so intriguing. And so with all of these different elements, and then reflecting on my own experience growing up in high school and being the firstborn of a Caribbean family where sex just was not talked about, but it was super salient,
Hmm.
in my culture and the things that I was seeing and hearing, but then nobody was talking about it. So all of that kind of led to me get to a place of like, okay, well, if nobody's going to talk to me about it or teach me about it,
Yeah.
then I'm going to have to figure it out on my own. And so that's
Amazing.
when I decided pretty early on in my master's program that I wanted to specialize in sex therapy. So actually, what I did was I took out extra student loans to cover the sex therapy certification because I'm, very much a type A personality, a recovering perfectionist myself. So I'm very much a planner, And so I set myself up to kind of go on this track because I knew that how necessary it was to open up these conversations. And it has been such an incredible journey that I'm just so excited to share the knowledge and the education and the experiences that I've gained along the way.
Ah, thank you for that. That's an
Yeah.
amazing story. And just in hearing that, like it takes so much curiosity. It takes maybe
Hmm.
that boredom of like, there's got to be more, or no one's
Hmm.
knocking on this door. Let me knock it down and see what happens. And being
Exactly.
surrounded by it, having that in your culture, but not being talked about. Like
Hmm.
there's
Hmm.
so much happening that
Yes,
we're just so like sheltered and don't want to
exactly.
explore. So thank you for
Yeah,
doing this work. Thank you for being
absolutely.
open to talking about
Yeah.
it. And just to zoom out or really
Hmm.
start with the individual, because there's a lot
Hmm.
happening. There's sexuality, there's gender, there's couples,
Hmm.
there's all of our cultural
Hmm.
backgrounds. If we're just
Hmm.
starting with the individual and their journey with sex,
Hmm.
where do we start with someone, for example, who's like, I don't know what to do with a sex therapist, or I don't know, I
Hmm.
just do what I see in the movies or what I'm told. Like, I don't question it, I don't ask. How
Yeah.
can that person begin to explore what sexuality is to them?
Oh, and as you were talking, I was thinking about one of my instructors for my certification and the term that he used to describe how we're addressing sexuality in our society. He called it sexual schizophrenia.
Ooh, this is good.
Yeah. So if we think about what schizophrenia is, right, where, sometimes we have hallucinations or delusions and we're kind of seeing things and hearing things. And then it's like, okay, but is this living in our head or is this reality? Right.
Mm,
And so it's like we're hearing all of these messages, we're seeing all of these things, right? If you think about the way that sex is portrayed in our society from billboards to music to movies, and, it's just like, oh, one kiss and now we're ready and now we're ready to get it on. And then it's hot and heavy and
mhm,
all of this kind of. But then what happens if our reality does not match or measure up to what society is telling us that
mhm,
sex should be, is, or supposed to be, or supposed to look like or feel like? And that
mhm.
is when we get to a point where we feel, well, at least what my clients tell me, the word that I hear so often, or the question is, what's wrong with me? Am I
Oh,
broken? Is this normal? Is that normal? There's so many questions because it's like, well, what my experience is doesn't match, right?
yeah,
What I'm
right.
seeing or what I'm hearing. So when we think about this kind of like, it's like absurd in so
Yeah.
many ways, right? But that I think is where, the root of my work really is to really help people understand that the more that we can shed essentially everything that we thought we knew about sex, everything that we have heard, everything that we have learned, even in terms of our past experiences with different partners, right? If we can
Mhm.
just kind of like put all of those things to the side for a moment and really start to tune in, well, what actually feels good for me? And how would I want to define sex, sexuality, intimacy, and that type of experience or connection that I'm either
Yeah.
wanting to have with myself or with a partner or potential partners, right? And
Hmm.
so I think it's all about redefining. And what I learned very early on through my undergraduate experience of rewriting our own story, I think that's really at the core.
Yeah.
And so to kind of shed all of the stuff and just kind of get to center and tune in and base off of what you've learned, does that feel good? Does it sound good? Does it actually match, what it is that you're experiencing? And if not, then is it okay if we kind of maybe throw that away or rewrite it or, take a completely different approach? And so
Yeah.
when we're coming back to the individual, it is about the individual because every body, literal body, is wired differently through all of our experiences, through our families, our cultures, again, experiences that we've had with other partners or things that we've heard from our friends. And, people joke about, like barbershop talk or beauty shop talk, right? And
Hmm.
oh, well, this is what I did last night and this is what you got to try, right? And yeah, great. We can try those things, but we have to, I don't want to say limit our expectations, but kind of set ourselves up of recognizing that just because something might work for someone doesn't mean that it's going to work for you. And
Totally.
being open to that exploration. And I think that's where it can get really fun as well,
Yeah. I love that you just said it can get fun. And the word that I'm hearing right now is like creating a sense of safety. But I
Mhm.
really like that you said fun because safety
Mhm.
feels like the foundation. Like, let's
Yes.
let go of the things that are hurting us, that are not
Yes.
sitting well with us, that
Exactly.
don't create fun. So
Hmm.
let's make it safe. Let's
Yes.
normalize your experience.
Yes.
And then we can
Exactly.
invite fun into the mix. Then we get to explore. Then you get to be creative and it's
Exactly.
limitless.
Exactly, exactly. And that's actually where I came up with the name of my business, Infinite Intimacy, because I
Ah.
believe that there are infinite ways and infinite possibilities for your intimate relationship. In our
Mhm.
society, unfortunately, when we hear the word intimacy, we equate that with sex. And when we hear the word sex, we equate that with intercourse. And when we hear the word intercourse, we think that it has to end in an orgasm, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so this creates a very kind of linear and a very rigid way of thinking about sex and intimacy because it's only giving us one way of being
Right.
intimate or being sexual. And so when we're pigeonholed in that way, it doesn't give us the opportunity or the permission to really explore all these other ways that we can be sexual and intimate with our partners and experience a meaningful connection or a playful connection or whatever type of connection that you're wanting.
Totally. Wow. I'm thinking of these two thoughts. One, that masculine and feminine energy
Mm,
and how there's a difference in arousal and response. And maybe let's go there first, because
yeah,
I think
yeah.
that comes into play. You're exploring your own sexuality, but
Mhm,
also understanding how you respond or how something is initiated is really important for you
mhm.
as well.
Absolutely. Well, this idea of masculine and feminine energy, I think it's very much tied to the way that we are perceiving, viewing, and responding sexually. Because in our
Mhm.
society, we're using more of that masculine lens, where if we kind of just explore what masculine and feminine energy is, it doesn't have anything to do with gender, right? It actually
Mhm.
very much resonates with the two parts, the two hemispheres of our brain, actually, right? So, one
Beautiful.
hemisphere of our one part of our brain is more about like the logistics and getting things done and the sequencing of things. That's where kind of that science or analytical brain comes in, right? But then the
Mhm.
other part of our brain is very much on the creative side, right? Like how can we explore and experiment and kind of like create things. Yeah.
Yeah,
So when
totally.
I think about masculine and feminine energy, remembering that it has nothing to do with gender, but for all of us, there's one side of our brain that's a little bit more dominant than others or than the other. Right.
Yeah.
And so when I think about the way that sexuality is portrayed in our society, it is from this masculine lens because it focuses on this idea of getting something done, the acts of sex.
Mm.
Yeah. So when we
Hmm.
talk about masculine energy, it's about the doing, it's about the getting things done. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I
so when
see.
we're viewing sex from that perspective, then it doesn't give us an opportunity to just kind of be in this space.
Right. Yeah.
And that's where I love to bring in the conversation around sensuality, because
Hmm.
sensuality really embodies the feminine energy. Sensuality is about slowing things down and learning how to be in the moment and just kind of be with ourselves or be with our partners. So
Hmm.
it really comes down to this idea of, what would happen if sex wasn't just something that we do, but it's space where we can go to just be and be with
Wow.
ourselves and with our partners.
Wow.
And so
Wow.
it's a complete shift in perspective and approach, and it just unlocks, again, so many
Yeah.
different possibilities.
That's a beautiful word. It totally unlocks. Just hearing it echoed back. I'm like, oh my gosh, that sounds incredible. I hope I hope everyone hears this. And something else I'm thinking through is, we're talking about the individual and this
Hmm.
experience, this creating safety, creating fun.
Hmm.
How does this work look like with a couple? Does a
Hmm.
couple come in
Yeah.
and share their interest in changing the landscape of their sex
Hmm.
life? Is it one
Hmm.
individual that comes in?
Hmm.
How do you kind of create this dance, and how do you
Hmm.
kind of get both partners involved?
Oh, so it's so interesting because it really is split when it comes to the intake calls that I have, where sometimes it's both partners, where they recognize we've been together X amount of years and, we really love each other, but we've kind of turned into roommates and I don't know, what's going on with our connection, right? And recognizing
Hmm.
that there needs to be a rebuilding of sorts.
Yeah.
I have sometimes I'll have one partner, and it can be men or women, right? That call and say, I recognize that there's a problem here, but I feel like the problem is with me. So I'm wanting to come in as an individual first and then bring my partner in. But then I have to explain to them, if we're talking about partnered sex, that's a team sport.
I
So
love that. It's a team sport.
it's important for both of you to really recognize and understand.
Do you think an individual calling and saying, I'm the problem, I need to work
Mhm,
on my sexuality?
mhm.
Well, I don't want to assign that that sounds like shame, but I'm curious from your
Yeah.
perspective, is that usually like, let me go deal with this in the dark? Let me go solve the issue? It sounds like that kind of masculine, like, let me go solve the problem. I'll come back
Mhm.
and everything will be fine.
All of this is rooted in shame, right? I
Yeah,
mean, when we talk about sexuality as a whole, there's so many. What I want to say, it kind of starts with those religious underpinnings,
totally.
what we've been told around what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, even down to self pleasure and premarital sex. And if we're doing these things, but we were told these are things that are, you're going to go to hell, quote unquote, go to hell, or there's all of this guilt and shame that's associated with it, right? And
Hmm.
especially when we don't have the education and we're just going based off of what society or our culture tells us. And then when that's driving our belief system, then maybe our partners are also making us feel like there's something wrong with us. And
Hmm.
that's where it gets really, really tough. Because if I have a partner that's telling me, well, what's wrong with you? And why can't you have an orgasm? And you don't have a sex drive, and I want to have more sex, right? And why don't you want to have more sex? And kind of driving those sources of shame, then I think
Hmm.
that's why people think that, okay, maybe this is something that I have to deal with on my own. But when we're recognizing the relationship dynamics and how that is really playing out in the sexual relationship, that's where we have to kind of come together and find that mutual understanding, right?
Hmm.
And it's so often when I kind of explain to my partners, well, if you bring your partner in from the onset, then I can also hear their perspective, right? Of
Right,
course,
right.
I can work with you, but what if what we're working on actually doesn't match what they're experiencing or what they're wanting, right? If I hear what both of you are wanting from your relationship and out of your intimate relationship, then we can get more clear of this landscape so that we can figure out the tools and resources that the both of you need to take into
Mm-hmm.
consideration or to start incorporating or accommodating, right?
Yeah.
And once I kind of explain, it's helpful for your partner to understand your experience. It's helpful for you to understand, your partner's perspective and what you think they want, because you might be telling me one thing, but it actually might be a different thing, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And most often the individuals that call will say, you know what, you're right. Let me talk to them and see if they're open to coming in. And more often than not, the partner is more than open and willing to come in. It's the individual that thinks that they have the problem, but the partner actually
Yeah.
wants to be very much involved, right?
Right.
And
Right.
that's what's so beautiful, because what I've realized is that quite often our sexual relationship kind of mirrors our everyday
Ooh,
relationship,
yeah, I bet.
right? If we're not taking the time to even have a conversation with each other and check in with each other and how are you doing and what's going on, and if we're just kind of rushing out the house without even giving each other a kiss or an embrace, or I hope you have a wonderful day, genuinely,
Yeah.
like not turning towards
Yeah.
our partner, then how are we going to be able to really access this deeply vulnerable and intimate space that
Yeah.
exists within our sexual self, you
Wow, I
know?
just had such a strong visual of like someone not even turning towards their partner as they're leaving and like that is, shutting off and it's heightened when you're in a more vulnerable setting. So
Mhm,
when you're
mhm.
trying to get intimate with someone,
Yes,
yeah, I could see that your physical posture towards someone, how you just
yes,
all the mannerisms, they show up in spaces in every space.
exactly,
Wow,
exactly.
that's
Yeah,
so fascinating.
yeah.
And I'm also thinking through so I'm holding on to this concept. Sexuality is really personal,
Mhm,
and it's also something you share with a partner. For
mhm,
those that are single and want to
mhm,
explore their
mhm.
sexuality, do you have individuals that you work with
Yes.
or okay, yeah, I'd love to hear more on
Absolutely.
that.
Absolutely. Well, because the relationship that we have with ourselves also
Mhm.
mirrors the relationship that we have with others. Our
Yeah.
whole kind of existence is is a mirroring experience, right? An
Mhm.
opportunity to kind of look into ourselves in a different way and learn and grow and shift and make the necessary changes that we need in order to really reach our highest and best, if that's what we're aiming for. Not everybody is, and
Yeah.
that's okay. But there's so many of us that I think recognizes that, there's some missing pieces here, or based off of intergenerational patterns or traumas or things
Oh
like
my
that,
gosh, I was just gonna
and
ask about that.
yeah,
Yep.
it's all that when I deal with individuals, like there's so much of that taking place of breaking these generational cycles. And
Mhm.
I think our generation is really understanding the importance of that, right? That again, the amount of information that we have available to us can be a blessing and a curse, right? Where we get
Mhm.
kind of overwhelmed and overloaded, but then we're also kind of shown that actually maybe there's a different way of being, and
Yeah.
not just what I've been told or what my family has been doing from generation to generation. And so
Right.
I think so many of us in our generation is understanding, okay, well, maybe it starts with me. And maybe I have to start kind of like picking up the reins. And it's really, really difficult work at times, but it can be so worth it.
Yeah.
So it's one kind of addressing, again, those patterns or those cycles that we might have gotten caught up into in terms of our belief systems and the way that we're operating or showing up in our world or in our relationship. It is addressing the relationship that we have with ourselves, right? The limiting beliefs, the deep insecurities that we've formed throughout our lives. And then
Yeah.
it's also really allowing ourselves to step into a space of self pleasure, right? And self
Mhm.
exploration, and really getting to know our bodies and what works for ourselves, and what are some of those hot spots or those hot buttons that I can share with my partner
Yeah.
because,
Yeah.
or with a potential partner in the future. Yeah.
Hmm.
Because if we don't know our own bodies or what works for us, then we can't expect our partners or potential partners to just know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To get it right. Yeah.
Exactly. And that puts so much pressure on the
Hmm.
partner to figure it out when it's really a co-constructed experience, right?
Mm.
And so when we're able to recognize, okay, it starts with me. I have
Yeah.
to, take a look and maybe work through some of the guilt and shame that I am carrying with me. And then I have to get to know myself and my body and learn to get comfortable in this
Hmm.
space. And through that comfort, we can start to develop a liking and then start to develop a loving, and then that is where we can really wholeheartedly kind of share ourselves and in these experiences.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm so happy you took it there because I think a lot of this can be really dark and really scary
Mhm,
to
mhm,
unpack. And,
mhm.
sometimes the deeper you go, the suppressed memories and
Yes.
troubling identities come up. Or a surface level, when I hear people talk about it, I don't want to, talk about that. What if I like end up hating my partner or something like
Mm,
that? Or like we don't get
mhm.
through it together. And
Yeah.
I think there's a lot more beneath the surface that we might
Yes.
be afraid to explore. I'd
Mhm,
love
mhm,
to touch on beyond that, getting to the
mhm,
self love, the self
mhm,
exploration, like kind of the
mhm.
liberation and the beauty that comes from doing that work. Because I really
Yes.
want people to feel empowered and excited to take this on.
Exactly, exactly. Well, are you familiar with Betty Dodson?
I know the name, but no.
Yeah, so Betty Dodson is actually one of like the pioneers and the forerunners and the thought leaders in sexual education. And what she did was she had groups of women that would come, and you would be required to take off your clothes as soon as you enter the space. So all these women were naked, right? Most of
Hmm.
these women did not know each other. So it started off very vulnerable and really raw in that way. And she would literally teach women how to find their pleasure, right? So she would have toys and tools for that and mirrors for them to look at themselves, look at their vulvas, look at their bodies, right? So they can get familiar with it, right?
Hmm.
It's so much of our fear and anxiety is around the unknown.
Yeah.
And for so many of us and the women that I work with, when I ask them, when was the last time that you took a look at your vulva? They're like, uh,
You're like, my what?
my exactly. So, quick sex ed, the vulva is everything that you can see. And
Hmm.
that's also
Hmm.
a part of the difficulty that we're having in our society because we're actually using the wrong terms, right? If
Hmm.
we're referring to everything down there as our vagina, then we're actually taking away from our pleasure center because
Mm.
our main point of pleasure is our clitoris, which lives in our vulva, not our vagina. So the vulva is everything that we can see, and the vagina refers to the vaginal canal. So if we can kind of shift that language, it can open up a lot of things within itself. So what she also did, Betty Dodson, was she had like drawings of different vulvas and kind of the way that vulvas present themselves. And one was like a Gothic or a Renaissance. She kind of put names to them, right?
Cool.
And what she would initially ask women of, and I do this in my practice as well. I have some of her drawings in one of her books, and I show it to my clients. And it's so interesting, especially when there's a partner involved, where I'll ask them, flip through some of these pictures and can you identify what your vulva looks like? And do you
Wow.
know how many women are not able
Can't do
to
that.
tell me
Yeah.
what their vulva looks like? And then I turn to their partner and I say, can you tell me which one? And right away,
Yeah, they
right?
got it.
Very quickly,
Mm.
they're like, oh, yeah, it's this one. And that
Yeah.
tells it all,
Wow.
right?
Totally.
And so when we're talking about this empowerment piece, right? If we don't even know what our bodies look like, or the parts of our bodies that hold our pleasure, right? Then
Mhm.
how can we really step into our power in that way? And I think,
Yeah.
unfortunately, in our society, we're not encouraged, to explore ourselves in this way because of all of that shame. But what
Yeah.
I have seen, witness, experience, not just through my work, but also my personal experiences, when you are able to identify this point of pleasure and power within yourself, right? When you're able to find those spaces and places where you feel just so in your body and
Mhm.
connected to yourself and connected to your body, and okay, this is what I like and this is what I need and this is what I want to share with you, right? And finding that voice, there is so much power in your voice.
Totally.
But first, you have to be able to identify and tap in, right?
Yeah.
And that space of like, this is, I mean, and for women, right? Our our wombs, our vulvas, our vagina, like we are sources of creation, right?
Yes.
And so within that lies our power. And
Yeah.
so when we're able to tap into that, and as you were describing earlier, that masculine versus feminine, right? Allowing ourselves to be with ourselves, to learn about our bodies, to tap in this way, and then to be able to share that with our partners is such an empowering place to be. And
Mhm.
it's when we don't have the opportunities to talk about these things that we just kind of stay hidden. And I'm just coming back to the work of Brene Brown and the
Mhm.
shame work that she does, right?
Mhm.
And when she says that shame lives in the darkness and it loses its power when we bring it to light. And so when
Yeah.
we're able to talk about our real life experiences of, hey, you know what? Yeah, in certain movies or in porn or erotica, we see this pounding thing going on, and I'm supposed to respond in this way with like the panting and the heavy breaths and all of those things. And so I'm just
Mhm.
kind of faking it and hopefully faking it till I make it, right? But
Yeah.
ladies, faking orgasms is the very worst thing that you can do if you're
Yeah.
trying to achieve an orgasm, right?
Yeah.
And so when we're able to recognize that, you know what, I don't have to respond in the way that it's being presented to me. I actually respond in a different way. And I'm going to tell that to my partner. And if they're open to receiving that, then maybe that's the partner that's safe to continue to
Yeah.
explore with. If I tell a
Yeah.
partner, well, I actually don't like it this way, let's try this way instead, and they shame me for that, then maybe that's not the partner to continue this exploration.
Oh, the sexploration. There it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And I love that. If this partner is safe to explore my sexuality with,
hmm
great. That's a great partner. If it's
hmm
unsafe, that's a really good indicator that some change needs to happen. If I want
Sure.
to be sexually satisfied and this partner
Exactly.
doesn't make it safe,
Yeah.
maybe there's an opportunity to create safety and maybe
Exactly.
there
Yes.
isn't, but that
Yes.
needs to be addressed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. What I tell my clients often, especially as a licensed marriage and family therapist with the certification in sex therapy, I tell them, from the onset, and I kind of explain to them the difference in approach between traditional couples counseling and sex therapy. So traditional couples counseling, we have this idea that when we work on all of these outside factors, right? The communication, the quality time, the daily check-ins and the building of the emotional intimacy, right? Then that helps us to kind of hone in on the sexual intimacy, right? So it's kind of working from like the outside in. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
But the idea or the approach with sex therapy is that sex can be viewed as both the problem and the solution. So in
Yeah.
sex therapy, we start with intimate sexual exploration or exercises to help the couple rebuild that part of their relationship first. Because the idea is that if I'm feeling that type of connection with my partner, that physical closeness, that kind of maybe tenderness, or maybe this kind of fun, playful space, or maybe it's more of like an aggressive kind of like a power dynamic, right? Where I can kind of
Mhm.
lean into these feelings of safety with my partner in this space,
Yeah.
then that helps to kind of trickle out into the relationship in other ways, right? We're maybe
Mhm.
less irritable, we're more tolerant, or more patient, right?
Yeah.
So I tell my clients that we can work from the outside in or we can work from the inside out. Change is going to happen either way. It just kind of depends on where they are at and what they need to kind of
Yeah.
address first.
That's
Right. And
beautiful.
so
Yeah.
I kind of take, and I think that's what's so beautiful about having both sides of this educational piece, because I have that kind of freedom and flexibility to kind of work through both sides and sometimes both simultaneously,
Yeah. Yeah.
and things, tend to shift very, very
That's
quickly once we
awesome.
start to shift our expectations and especially open up this understanding that sex and sexuality and intimacy doesn't have to look one specific way.
Yeah, yeah, there's no standard, so there's
Mhm,
not like, "Okay, you come into my office and exercise number 1 is going to
mhm.
be this. Thank you,
Right, right,
go
right.
home, do your homework, and come
Yeah.
back to me." Yeah, that just it doesn't even make sense saying it
No,
out loud.
no,
There's
no.
so much processing and so much that each partner brings to the table that they might be
Exactly.
aware of parts of it, they might not be aware, and
Yes.
I love that you can just filter through. Is it an outside approach? Is it inner? Is it both? What feels
Yes.
good for them? What feels where are they starting at? What are they bringing
Exactly.
to the office right
Exactly.
now?
Yep. Yep. That's
Yeah.
exactly it. And I have a consultation process where I do ask my clients if, like, okay, well, what's really going on, right? If they say, well, there's communication, but the communication is spilling over into our intimacy, I'm like, okay, that's fine. My key word with clients is roommate. When I hear that they say that, "Ugh, we just feel like we're roommates and, taking care of the kids and all the things, we just don't have time for each other," that's really my ideal client, because that really taps into the relationship dynamics, which is my specialty.
Mhm.
I've gotten to the point where, I'll have couples call me and say, this is our last ditch effort. I'm like, oh, I'm not the therapist for you, unfortunately,
Yeah.
right? I'm here to really help enhance relationships, not just quote unquote fix relationships, right? And so
Mhm.
I have so many colleagues that, I refer to when there's other dynamics going on, because where I know, at least where I find my joy and my purpose and my and my passion is
Mhm.
really helping in this enhancing space. And I think that's where, when you're talking about sex therapy and is this what I need, or I'm just going to kind of go along with what I've been told and just kind of think, okay, is that okay? Right? It's really thinking about, am I fully satisfied here?
Yeah.
Maybe there doesn't need to be an overt problem in the relationship, right? But if you're
Mhm.
feeling just a little disconnected, if you're feeling like, I want to feel a little bit closer to my partner, I want to enhance this part of the relationship, recognizing that by catering to your intimate relationship, it just helps to enliven the relationship so much more, right?
Yeah.
So there doesn't have to be a specific dysfunction, but if you're sensing a disconnect and this disconnect is a pattern that's been occurring, and now it feels like this disconnect, this divide is getting a little bit wider over time, then that's when we need to really kind of step in, rather than thinking, oh, it's just a phase, and it might be just a phase, right? It might be, those moments right after childbirth, the first 6 months to a year of, new parents, yes, your sexual relationship is going to look completely different. But if
Mhm.
that prolongs to 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, then okay, now we actually probably do have a problem here. And so
Yeah.
before even getting to that point, why not open up these conversations?
Yeah.
And what the research shows, and this is research from Dr. Barry McCarthy, and he's written quite a few books on sexual response and the differences between men and women and the way that we respond sexually. He has found that couples that are having sex, this is where we kind of have to redefine, right? Because when couples ask me, well, how often should I be having sex? Right? I
Mhm.
tell them, well, I can't. I can't give you that answer, right?
Mhm.
Let's have a conversation and let's figure out what feels comfortable for you, what feels comfortable for your partner. And then that's how we kind of open up this collaborative space, right?
Yeah.
For some couples, it's once or twice a week. For some couples, it's once or twice a month, right? But
Mhm.
what we can say, or what we have learned from the research, is that quote unquote sexless marriages are defined as less than 10 times a year, right?
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
what I like to tell my couples, although I can't tell you what's normal because there is no normal, right?
Mhm.
You have to define what's normal for your relationship. But if you're having sex less than one time a month, then that's where maybe we need to start tuning in a little bit, because then you're neglecting intimacy within your relationship, right? And
Yeah.
again, sex isn't just intercourse. There's a bunch of different ways that we can be sexual. Yeah.
Right.
So,
Right.
what Barry McCarthy has found is that couples that are having sex regularly, and again, that's defined by the couple, report a 15 to 20% increase in marital satisfaction. Yeah.
Mhm.
So it kind of bumps you from like a B to an A, because it really just adds from like this like life and vitality and this vibrancy
Yeah.
to the
Gives you some texture
relationship.
to life.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's like all of these different ways that we can enjoy each other and enjoy each other's bodies and experience that pleasure and connection. But then on the flip side, couples that aren't having sex regularly, and sexless marriages is defined by less than 10 times a year. These couples report, I believe it's a 65 to 70% decrease in marital satisfaction. So if
Yeah.
you're having it, great. You're
Mhm.
kind of stepping into this kind of vibrancy within the relationship. But if you're not having it, then that's where couples are really, really feeling dissatisfied. Right.
Yeah.
So again, pulling away from sexual dysfunction, it's just looking at how are you feeling within your relationship, and do you feel that there's a disconnect here?
Yeah. And I'm curious. I love that we're being delicate with there is no normal.
Hmm.
So it's your temperature gauge.
Hmm.
I'm curious for those maybe life circumstances, transitional periods, high
Hmm.
stress,
Hmm.
things are changing, evolving, and maybe there's a lack of intimacy in the
Hmm.
relationship or
Hmm.
just a desire for change, for more, for something different.
Hmm.
How what can the start of those conversations look like? What is some advice that you can offer for people that are like, I don't know how to what the conversation is. Do we go directly to a sex therapist? Do we have it in our bedroom? Do we go on a walk? Curious what they can start with.
Yeah. Well, if you're noticing that there's a little bit of a disconnect, or if maybe, that disconnect is now starting to build into some frustration or tension within the relationship, because that's
Mhm.
often what happens, right? When we're able to address, okay, I'm not feeling maybe satisfied in this way, or, I would really love to experience more intimacy with you, right? If couples are realizing, and it's a little difficult because what's happening is that couples are already having these conversations. But I
Mhm.
think in the way that they're having these conversations, it's not always helpful or effective, right? Because in
Yeah.
these moments where it's like, okay, I'm noticing a disconnect, and one or both partners might be expressing, okay, well, let's do this, or let's try this, or let's be intentional about that. But then life gets in the way, and then we're
Mhm.
not following through with the things that we say or we know that we really need to do. And then partners are feeling like, well, you don't care about
Ooh,
this. And
yeah.
so then that turns into a completely different dynamic, right? Of, well, I
Mhm.
expressed to you that this is kind of what I'm feeling or what I would like to happen. And I don't see any movement or any improvement on your end. And so what are we doing here? So by the time it gets to those points of frustration, that is really when seeking a professional and learning how to kind of work through these dynamics is really important, because the couples that are able to kind of see the warning signs and kind of step in, they're not the ones that are coming to therapy, right? Because they are
Yeah.
working through it on their own. And so it
Mhm.
is being able to kind of start becoming aware of, okay, when was the last time that we even sat down on the couch together without any distractions and really had a meaningful conversation, right? When was the last time that
Yeah.
we really just allowed ourselves to cuddle in bed without any expectation of something, else happening? Am I feeling like sex is an obligation or a duty that I have to fulfill, right?
Ooh, yeah. Yeah.
Because if that's what's happening as well, then there needs to be some shifts in perspective or approach. And I think that's where bringing in your partner is really important to understand. Is this what they're expecting of you? Or are you placing that expectation on yourself?
Yeah.
And so when we talk about having these conversations, one, it's having these conversations in a more casual setting, not
Hmm.
having these conversations in the intensity of a frustrating moment. It's
Hmm.
recognizing, okay, I hear your frustration. Let's take some time. And through the work of Dr. John Gottman, we know that it takes about 20 minutes, for our nervous system to kind of calm down a little bit. So let's take a little bit of time. Let's take
Hmm.
a little break, a pause, what he calls timeout, to kind of go into our own corners, to kind of like self soothe or self regulate. And then we can come back and have a conversation. I like to
Yeah.
encourage couples to have a conversation on their couch or while they're going for a walk. Because if you're sitting at your dining room table and you're looking at each other eye to eye very intently, it can kind of
Eek.
feel, we don't want it to feel like a boardroom. We don't want it
Yeah.
to feel like a reprimand. We don't want to feel
Yeah, that feels like
blame.
punishment, intensity. Yeah.
Exactly. Or shame, or like, that intense eye contact can be really, really overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
Where because these
Just
conversations are
thinking about it, I'm
super,
like, ugh.
yeah, yeah. These conversations are super vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
And so if we don't feel comfortable, that eye to eye might keep the walls up versus allowing them for the walls to come down. So I like to
Hmm.
encourage couples to just kind of sit beside each other on the couch and maybe have some music on in the background and just allow it to be a little bit more kind of casual and free flowing, right? There's so many
Hmm.
resources of conversation starters and things that you can talk to your partner about. There's apps. Esther Perel just came out with a wonderful card game. There are other card games. I think it's like If Then. It's this black box. It's on Amazon for like 20 bucks
Oh,
or something like that. I'll have to find the name and send it over to you as a
perfect.
resource for couples because again, it doesn't have to be like this intense conversation. You can pick a card and say, "Hey, what is your favorite sexual position?" I don't think we've ever talked about that. Do you have one?
Yeah.
Right? And
Hmm.
what do you enjoy most sexually? Where do you like to be touched? What's your favorite place to be touched? Where don't you like to be touched? Right? We can open up
Yeah.
those types of conversations. If you go for a walk, that's perfect. I call them walk and talks because you're
Hmm.
walking side by side. It's just like you don't have to have this intense moment. It's just, more casual
Yeah,
and
it
free
helps the
flowing.
jitters. You're walking, you're doing something.
Exactly, exactly. And so if you recognize that it's not like you're not at the point where now you're shut down sexually because of all of
Yeah.
this pressure and all this expectation, then I think there's still room for couples to have these conversations on their own. But when the intensity and the tension and the frustration has now built into, especially when we get to these points of resentment, that
Yeah.
is definitely, definitely
That's
time
ding,
to,
ding, ding. Yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah. But first, it's, starting to recognize the patterns. We don't want it to get to the point of frustration, tension, and resentment, right? Because that makes it even harder to come back from. So it's really
Yeah.
once you start noticing the pattern and you're trying to kind of implement certain solutions or resolutions, but it's just not working and you're still finding yourself in those patterns, then that is really the time to open up these conversations with somebody else or maybe be open to a different experience.
Yeah.
So much of the work that I do, even though my main business is my private practice of working with couples one on one, hour by hour, what I've noticed is that, that's just, it's a really drawn out process,
Hmm.
right? And yes, therapy is so helpful and so effective. And we do often need the time in between sessions to kind of process some things. But what I've noticed when it comes to our sexuality, once we kind of learn this is how I respond sexually, this is how my partner responds sexually, and then this is what we need to do to accommodate for those differences, that just because we're different doesn't mean we're incompatible, but
Yeah.
we can recognize that, hey, if this is what they need, then yeah, I'm willing to do that. If this is what they need, then yeah, let me try that for them.
Hmm.
So many couples are able to recognize once they learn about their own sexual response. And again, so much of my work is that psychosexual education, helping them learn about their own sexual response and the different factors that are leading to their turn-ons and leading to their turn-offs, right? So that we can be more
Yeah.
aware of that and create this kind of like roadmap of sorts, right? Recognizing that it doesn't
Hmm.
have to be a rigid road, but like here are kind of the parameters, and here are,
Yeah, here's where you can play.
mhm,
The boundaries are
exactly.
actually all of this.
Exactly, exactly. And to have more of those immersive experiences where I host couples retreats and couples workshops and private retreats where they can really just kind of hone in, it just that immersive component also kind of just helps the trajectory because
Yeah.
you're able to take that time or extended period of time to really focus rather than, okay, we're coming to talk for an hour and now I got to go pick up my kids from school and now we're getting back into the
Right.
day-to-day routine. So when are we actually going to make time to practice the things that we talked about? And yes, couples are finding that time and they are making it work, and it's incredible to see when couples are being intentional and really, really stepping back in to their relationship in a wholehearted way, right? And it's so beautiful to
Yeah.
watch. But then I also see where couples are, yes, they're having these wonderful conversations in session, but then they're still finding a really hard time to make that time and space for themselves and each other outside
Hmm.
of the therapy room. And that is where some of these more immersive experiences, I think, can be that bridge.
Yeah, it's hard. And what I'm hearing, what I'm taking away is there's an opportunity to have a conversation with your partner
Mhm,
on a walk, on the couch, making it less formal,
mhm,
comfortable, maybe
mhm,
having those cards that you can flip through,
mhm.
start being like, I actually don't know what my favorite position is. I'm gonna take note of that. And maybe we'll
Yeah,
come back to that. Maybe I want to explore that. Maybe we explore that. I don't
yeah.
know. But just
Mhm,
opening that up and just
mhm,
having that conversation if and when that feels good. And
mhm.
then for those lingering or uncomfortable feelings, maybe those intensives are perfect where you're like, I don't hate my partner. I love my partner, but something's missing or we're
Right.
not connecting or
Yeah, we've
I'm
hadn't
hearing
had the
his needs,
time.
I'm hearing my needs. I don't really know how they fit.
Yeah.
And I'm curious and I want to learn more, but I
Mhm.
don't have the tools or resources
Yeah.
and
Or
these
the time.
retreats or the time. Yeah, because life
Yeah,
happens and no one's doing
exactly.
anything wrong. But of
Right.
course, when you're trying to figure something out and then you have the kids to pick up or
Mhm,
work
mhm,
ramps up and
mhm, mhm.
you're moving, whatever it is, it's hard to get
Exactly.
to the thing that's
Yeah. Or
challenging you in
you're
your life.
in school and exams and all of those things, right?
Yeah.
It's like all of those things. I have a couple right now where one of the partners is finishing up her dissertation and she's like, I just don't have the capacity, right? And so it's talking through those things and recognizing that it's understanding that we don't have to take it personally, right? And her
Yeah.
partner was taking it personally and like, well, why doesn't she want? Well, we only have so much that we can give, right? And if we don't even have
Yeah.
the time to feed into ourselves, then how are we really going to feed into this relationship? So
Yeah.
it's all of these dynamics and so many different dynamics that might be playing a role. And so the more that we can just become aware and be open to opening up these conversations, it can just help to make the world of difference.
Totally. And
Mhm,
and to that point too, sex drive is energy. It requires energy. So some
mhm,
days are really tired, some days are really stressed, some periods of time. So it's
mhm.
all it's taking into account everything that's going on. It's
Yeah.
working with yourself, working with your partner.
Yep.
And yeah, taking a lot of that, I can just imagine, the partners communicating, you don't want me anymore. I don't get it.
Mhm,
Why am I not enough? And
mhm,
hearing that makes it
mhm.
really challenging to then be like, well, no, actually, it's because da 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 da, and I'm going through this, but I do love you and I am really attracted to you, and we can solve all of this right now. It's
Mhm.
really hard when you're challenged with that pressure. So,
Yes.
peeling off that pressure, sitting on the couch, calming down those 20 minutes, just
Yes.
making sure you're having those conversations with the loving intention of
Exactly.
meeting your partner where they're at.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And it's that consideration and compassion, I think, are two words that are coming to me when having these conversations. It's understanding that one, these conversations are hard to have within themselves, as we talked about earlier, right? With all of the shame that's riddled in the topic of sex and these expectations of what we think we need to fulfill. And so when we're kind of going into these conversations with those feelings already, then the more compassionate that we can be and considerate that we can be with ourselves and with our partners, right? It helps to kind of lower those walls. And listening with an ear to hear versus to respond, right? To
Hmm.
really be able to say, okay, this is what I'm hearing your experience is. Am I getting that right? And when we're able to reflect back in that way, then that's what opens up the dialogue where it's not
Hmm.
just, well, this is what I think and this is what you believe, right? It's
Right,
really
right.
opening it up for both perspectives because both realities are or both experiences are very real, right?
Yeah.
And it's a part of each partner's reality. And so we can't judge them for that. We can't blame them for that. We have to really try to gain an understanding. We might not ever fully understand, right? But
Hmm.
it's being able to take their experience into consideration so that you can recognize, okay, even if I don't necessarily agree with
Hmm.
what they think or how they're approaching this, I can see where it may be coming from.
Right,
Right.
right.
And that's when I open up those types of conversations, it's so meaningful, right? Because we're letting the guards down. We're stepping out from that tug of war, that tit for tat, the well, this is what
Oh,
I
yeah.
need, and you're not giving me what I need, so I'm not giving you what you need, and that
Oh, yeah.
that terrible
All
back
those
and forth.
assumptions. Hmm.
Exactly, exactly. And so to recognize that, we're here as long as you're willing to show up, right? I
Yeah.
tell my clients, my family's from Jamaica, and so I grew up listening to Bob Marley, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with his song "Is This Love," but
Hmm.
he has one verse in there that says, "I'm willing and able." And as I was completing my program and starting to see clients, and I had the music on in the background, and I heard the verse, and I was like, ah, what a genius,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
Because we can't have one without the other. Yeah. We
Hmm.
can have all the willingness in the world, but if we don't have the ability, nothing's going to happen. Right. And vice versa. We have all the ability in the world, but if we don't have the willingness, then nothing's going to happen. And so, what I tell
Wow.
my clients is that if they're coming to me, they're probably coming to me to learn the able, but I can't necessarily give them the willingness.
Yeah. That's a
Right.
personal, yeah.
Exactly. And that has to come from them, right? If you're not
Um,
willing to really allow yourself to hear your partner's experience, to take a look at yourself and maybe where you can also step in differently and be able to express to your partner what you need. And if they're not able to hold that or to take a look at themselves and how they can step in differently, right? You might not know the how, and that's okay. That's what we're here for, right?
yeah.
That's what professionals like us
Yeah.
are here for. But it really
Wow.
starts with the willingness.
Yeah. I want to throw in one more thing here
Mhm,
and get a little personal, but to
mhm,
me, intimacy, I have my own relationship with intimacy
mhm,
and with my partner. And
mhm,
to me, both feel necessary
mhm,
and important and
mhm,
empowering and
mhm,
kind of different.
mhm,
And I just wanted to throw that in there because we're talking a lot about couples and what you need from your partner. But that could
Mhm.
also be like what I need on my own
Yes.
independently. And that doesn't
Yes.
take away from the relationship.
Exactly.
It's just
Mhm.
nurturing my relationship with sex.
Yeah. And nurturing my relationship with myself,
Yeah.
right? I mean, when I work with individuals, I ask them, what type of thoughts are you having about yourself? What is the inner dialogue?
Mm,
Are they building you up or are they breaking you down? Right. And
yeah.
so then, if we're able to really work on that relationship with self and the way that I view intimacy into me see, yeah,
Yee! Good.
right?
Yeah.
It is a beautiful experience of seeing our partners for who they are, all of who they are, and also allowing myself to be seen for who I am, all
Wow.
of who I am, right? The good, the bad, the ugly, the beautiful, everything in between, right? And when I say seeing my partner for who they are, not who I want them to be, not who I expect them to be, but who they are, right? And can
Yeah.
I accept that? And yes, we all have areas of opportunity for growth, right?
Hmm.
But again, it comes back to that willingness of if we even think it's necessary to grow or change in that way. If you're wanting to grow or change in one way and your partner is not, then that's a different conversation, right? But if both
Yeah.
of you are recognizing, hey, there's something here that we can enhance or we can really kind of focus on and hone in on, right? Then we can do that. But as you're saying, intimacy, being seen is deeply, deeply vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
And going back to, again, Brene Brown's work on vulnerability and shame and courage, right? Where vulnerability is the birthplace of courage and connection, right?
Yeah.
And we can't have a conversation about vulnerability without having a conversation about authenticity, right?
Yeah.
And so, if we haven't gone through the process or allowed ourselves to really reflect on, well, not just who am I, but what feels good and what do I want here? Or what do I want to experience here? And is that coming from my authentic self or is it a voice that I heard from
Hmm.
somewhere else? Right. So much of my work of, asking my clients, especially when I'm asking them about that inner dialogue, I'm like, well, whose voice is that? Right?
Yeah.
Is it your mother or your pastor or, your ex-boyfriend that was abusive? Like, whose voice
Yeah.
was that? Right? And if it's not yours, then that's where we need to learn to let that shit go.
Yeah.
Because
And
if
you
it's not,
can. Yeah.
mhm. And because if it's not coming from you, it's not meant for you. Right?
Ooh.
If
Wow.
it's not
Powerful.
building you up, then what is its purpose?
Yeah. What is it serving you?
Mhm. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So that when you're talking about that personal intimacy, what do I need? It's also, well, what do I need to connect with myself and my
Hmm.
authentic self and to be able to hear my voice versus all these other voices, right? The schizophrenia
Yeah.
that
There it is
lives,
again. Yeah.
that lives amongst us, you know?
Totally.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for that. That was
Yeah.
an incredible way to bring it all together, all the threads with just this into me see.
Hmm.
So vulnerable to be seen.
Yes.
And sex is vulnerable.
Yes.
We don't talk about it.
Hmm.
We have these expectations. We have
Hmm.
so much buzz around us and toys and things that just are selling one kind of image.
Yes. Hmm.
And all of this is letting go of any
Hmm.
voice that isn't yours, that's
Yeah.
sitting in your bedroom with you in these moments. Doesn't need to be there. And we can let it go. It can be memories, it can be
Hmm.
relationships, it
Hmm.
can be
Hmm.
religious affiliations.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's not about like cutting cords with everything and
Right.
disengaging from
No.
everyone, but they don't need to
Right.
be in your head when you're
Exactly.
intimate.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. The work by Dr. Emily Nagoski, she has an incredible
Mm,
book called Come As You Are.
come as
And
you
I
are. Yeah.
highly recommend every single woman to read this book, and anyone that's in a relationship, a sexual relationship with a woman, to read
Mm-hmm.
this book. And one of the things that she talks about is to kind of create like this magic circle of sorts, right? Recognizing that this world, all of our responsibilities, all of the roles that we have, all of the things that we have to do is still going to be there.
Yeah.
Even if we allow
Won't go away.
ourselves to have 15, 20, 30 minutes, an hour, right? So it's kind of
Hmm.
shifting your mindset of recognizing, do I need to bring all of this into this sacred space?
Oh, I love that.
Or can
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
recognize that, you know what? For X amount of time, I'm going to allow myself to just put those down so that I can be here in this moment. And
Yeah.
so it's really, you know, when we talk about shifting perspectives and shifting our approach, mindset is everything, right? And especially when it
Hmm.
comes to sex, it's set and setting our mindset
Yes.
and the environment that we're in, right? That impacts, you know, how comfortable or how safe we feel to then open up in this really, really vulnerable way.
Yeah.
So there's so many things to take into consideration. And I know all of this is really kind of just scratching the surface, but it's just little nuggets to take into consideration as you embark on this journey if this is a road that you want to go down.
Yeah, amazing. I love that
Yeah.
circle. And immediately I'm thinking of meditation. And of
Mhm.
course, there are thoughts and there's things you want to think about and your ego gets attached to. And that also happens in that vulnerable sexual state when you're like, oh, I didn't do the dishes. And oh, I have like laundry to pick up and this to
Yeah.
do. And
Yeah. And I forgot to respond to that email. And yeah.
yeah. And then it's like, of course, you're not excited right now. You're thinking of all the things you have to do. And
Exactly.
it's, yeah, but finding that way, creating that sacred space, however that looks
Mhm.
for you, but starting
Mhm.
to explore with that to be able
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
enjoy that space as much
Yeah.
as you can.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Ah, amazing. Thank you so much. I want to ask where people can find you. You are
Mhm.
based in Florida, and I'm
Mhm.
curious if, is sex therapy the same with licensed therapists you work within state boundaries?
So, so my license, because my license is in marriage and family therapy, it is restricted to the state of Florida, and that's why I've kind of expanded my services to include intimacy coaching as well, so that I can work with
Amazing.
people outside of the state. It's understanding the difference between coaching and therapy.
Mhm.
Although my therapeutic style is a little bit more of a coaching style anyway. So, you know, there's just
Just all the thing. Yeah.
yeah, there's some subtle differences that we do have to take into consideration, and I help my clients understand the differences. If there's overt, you know, mental health challenges here, then I would have to refer them to a licensed therapist in their state. Those types of things.
Mhm.
When it comes to the sex therapy certification, actually, the state of Florida, and I think California might be one of the other ones, but the state of Florida is one of the only states that requires clinicians to receive a certain amount of education and certain types of classes and a certain amount of hours and supervision in order to legally call yourself a sex therapist.
Mm.
So in other states, therapists can be taking that one sexuality course and then, you
Yeah.
know, maybe do a couple of other trainings and then kind of call themselves a sex therapist. That is not something that's allowed in the state of Florida. So there is an intensive training that we have to go to in order to go through in order to legally call ourselves sex therapists. And that is also, I don't want to say confined, that's the wrong word, but because my license isn't in sex therapy, my license is governed by, you know, marriage and family therapy. So technically I'm not able to practice sex therapy outside of the state of Florida either. Right.
Mhm. Mhm.
But again, that's where, you know, these intensives and these immersive experiences and the retreats where I'm offering my services in a different type of way, right? Where I'm allowing for my experience, my education, my expertise to really kind of hone in so that we can kind of navigate around the restrictions.
Yeah. So anyone outside of Florida can benefit from your true expertise, from what you've crafted from your education. And then anyone within Florida gets the full spectrum, Rachel.
Yeah.
The license galore.
The traditional therapy in a sense,
Yeah.
the traditional therapy. But the couples retreats that I host or hold, it can be a few couples, where last year my couples retreat was actually in Jamaica. I had 4 couples that
Wow.
came down and to join me to have
Amazing.
an incredible experience. And so this year I'm focusing more on what I'm calling private retreats. And
Ooh.
so that's where I'm able to work one-on-one with couples for an extended period of time. And it's either a 1, 2, or 3-day program. And so day one, if you wanted to just do day one, that is the foundation. So this is where you're going to be learning about the difference between desire and arousal, your desire styles, your arousal styles, so that you can understand these differences that might be emerging from each of the partners, right? And kind of recognize, okay, just because we're different doesn't mean we're incompatible. We just have to take these differences into consideration. And here's a few tools that you can kind of use to kind of hone in on that. And
Mhm.
then day two, if you wanted to do the 2-day, that's where I call it the expansion. So that's where we're
Mm.
really, now that we have this foundational understanding, we're kind of building in these kind of fun and playful ways and tools and exercises to kind of explore each other in a totally different way. And
Wow.
then day three, that's where I'm calling it kind of like the depth or the elevation, right? Where
Mm.
I take a very much kind of holistic approach. It's not just the mind and body. I think that that spiritual or that energetic component is so important to take into consideration because
Yeah.
that's often like where some of those ties are, right? And
Mhm.
so day three is where I kind of go into some of the tantric
Oh,
certifications that I've taken
beautiful.
and really diving into the couple's breathing and just kind of
Oh,
going even deeper into that type of experience. And those are the things that I can't necessarily do, within the traditional therapy set. And
mhm.
so the full 3 days, I kind of think about it as like 3 months of therapy into 3 days,
Yeah. Oh my God, it
where
sounds
you're going to get
magical.
everything that you need, And so I am
Yeah.
so, so excited to offer this. And it's brand new offerings that I just started this year that I curated based
Amazing.
off of the couples retreats and workshops that I've been doing over the last couple of years. I've just kind of,
Yeah, you've had all the data points and it's
yeah,
like,
yeah,
wait,
yeah.
we
Yeah.
can just do this in
We
3
can
epic
do this.
days.
Exactly,
Oh
exactly.
my
It's for
gosh.
really profound connection and healing and it's so magical and I'm just so excited. I'm so excited when couples
Wow.
are open to stepping into their relationship in this way because it changes again the trajectory and it opens up the infinite possibilities and
Yeah.
it's pure magic. It's so good.
Wow.
So good.
Where do people sign up for this? Where do
I
I sign up for this?
know.
And where, when, where, how, what?
Yeah. So you can find the information for the private retreats on my website,
Mhm.
infiniteintimacytherapy.com. And then for other workshops and things that I have coming up, typically promote those on my social media platforms. So my Instagram and Facebook accounts are Infinite Intimacy Therapy. I haven't yet TikTok. I'm still like a
That's
work in progress.
okay.
Yeah. And
It's
so,
scary. There's too many new things,
yeah,
but
yeah.
it's a good one.
Yes, for sure. And my social media, especially my Instagram, I really, really try to offer as much information as possible. And a lot of times in like a fun and playful way, because we got to take the stigma out of it. We got to take the
Mhm.
pressure and intensity out of it and recognize that this is a space where we can play and have fun. And once we kind of know and understand, okay, these are kind of the foundational pieces, then that's where we can expand on
Yeah,
it.
totally. And I can attest to your Instagram because that's how I found you and knew that you'd be an amazing
Yeah.
person to talk to. So yes, you're authentic, you put great information out there, and wow, these workshops,
Yeah.
1 to 3 days. I also like that you can choose what kind
Yes.
of feels right
Mhm,
and
mhm,
go all 3 if you're ready for that. Do
mhm,
1, do 2, kind of
mhm,
piecemeal
mhm.
it as you see fit.
Exactly,
Um,
exactly, and they don't have to be consecutive,
yeah.
it
Ooh, great
and
point.
And I think this is where I also, am kind of expanding beyond my license, right? Where
Mhm.
I kind of viewed it as, if somebody from the Northeast or, the Midwest, and if you want to come from California, please join me,
Oh,
and I've created some partnerships with a couple of hotels down in Fort Lauderdale Beach so that it can be a real getaway, and including like couples massages and things like that, so that you can have that
wow.
full experience. So it's not just for people in Florida. If you want to come down to beautiful South Florida and have a vacation, but an intentional
You're
vacation.
living in a very vacation
Yeah,
resort space. So sounds like
exactly.
the perfect blend of everything.
Hmm.
I'm
Hmm.
really excited for you
Yeah.
and for everyone that gets to experience this work.
Yeah.
And I'm like making a mental note of when I'm coming to Florida.
You can call me up, Molly. Call me
Oh
up.
my gosh, I can't wait. Sounds amazing. Rachel, thank you so, so, so much.
My
And like
pleasure.
you said before, you had a great conversation. In a lot of ways, we're scratching the surface.
Hmm.
It's a tool to
Hmm.
start these
Hmm.
conversations, a way
Hmm.
to do it, resources, and the encouragement to do it, to enjoy your sexuality
Yeah.
and let go of those voices that aren't
Yeah.
serving you.
Exactly. Exactly. It is my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Well, bye bye.